Former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Dorit Beinisch. Thank you for joining us on i24NEWS. We're going to get to the substance of, I'll get to the substance of the government's judicial reform plan in a minute. But I just want to start by asking you, right now, the political opposition in the Knesset to the judicial reform plan says they will not negotiate until the legislative process is frozen. What is your view on that position? Do you agree with that?
Of course, I agree with that. I agree with that because once you start this legislation, it has nothing to do with the judicial reform. This is, in my view, and not only me, this is really a regime reform. It has nothing to do with the legal system. It's the system of government, and this is not accepted. If they start legislation, it means that they want to change the system of government and, of course, to change the status of the Supreme Court and the courts, which is not acceptable.
Well, how do you respond?
That's the way I see it.
How do you respond to the criticism by those in the government that the reforms will make the courts more democratic, more representative, and it's a reaction to an activist court that was usurping the role of the legislature?
No, this is really, I don't know how to start because every proposition that you put is really wrong. First of all, if it will be more democratic, this is a matter of definition. What does democracy mean? How do we define democracy? So we don't have to define it, but we know what are the characteristics of a democracy. Democracy is the first important thing, having an independent judiciary. Once the judiciary is bound by government, appointed by government, and has to be with political figures, it is not a democratic court. It's not a court. I mean, democracy is not the majority rule. This is what they claim. The politicians say, we are the majority, so we will form the court. A legal system is built, of course, the whole system, on the culture, the tradition, the history of a society. So every society has its institutions and its legal system. Our legal system is very special because of the characteristics of this pluralistic society. Very complicated. We have no written constitution, which is the first thing. The government, the system of government means that the coalition rules the Knesset, our parliament, which actually means that the government and representatives that were elected are in government, are in the Knesset, legislature, so they shouldn't be also in the court. There is no checks and balances when all three branches of government are held by the same party or even person.
Right.
So this is not a democratic court. That's the problem.
Well, what is your reaction to the proposal, to the compromise proposals put out by President Herzog? And also, he also did include some criticism of the court, saying that he felt that the majority in the country, or many people in the country, felt there does need to be some reforms taken.
I don't want to say anything that criticizes the president of the state. I really admire this president and his office. But, of course, this criticism of the system is not really serious. I mean, the whole idea of our checks and balances is built on the fact that the court could review the administration, review some kind of legislation when it infringes upon human rights or other issues that the court should review with judicial review. No one can actually put any balance and any way to criticize, to review any political decision. It doesn't matter what the decision is. The government wants to rule the court. And this is, of course, a dictatorship when the government is to decide what are the decisions, who will review them, and how they review them, and where are the checks. balances. Where are they?
Ms. Beinisch, are there any parts of the government's program that you see some possible compromise, a change in the way the judges are selected, or perhaps limiting the power of judicial review, or giving the override to the Knesset at a certain number? Do you see any room for compromise there?
Of course, we need a compromise because the situation is so tense now. And there should be a compromise, but the question is what a compromise means. If it's to change the system, as to selecting judges, I don't think we should do it, because there is no perfect system for selecting judges. But I think that our system is one of the best, really, and this is how it is appreciated in the world too. Because it's a combination of the political power, ministers in government, Knesset members, and the professional 3 justices of the Supreme Court. It's the committee that selects judges. To have a political nomination of judges where you have no other checks and balances on what the government decides, it's not the United States. No one has a veto against every part of its Senate or Congress or president. We don't have this, which means that they will select the judges, all of them politicians. The majority are from the, of course, coalition, which means, again, the government. They rule the Knesset. They will rule the court. Who will check it? Who will do the basic function of the Supreme Court?
Let me ask the question then, Ms. Beinisch, because the government does have the votes in the Knesset to make these changes. What if they go ahead and do so? How do you see the repercussions, both here in Israel and maybe for Israel internationally?
I'm really worried. First of all, I'm worried. You said there are certain components that we can accept. I mean, the override, which is dangerous and not democratic, yet we can form a kind of override, which doesn't exist, not in the United States. It's only Canada in very special circumstances. You cannot compare, as I said from the beginning, different systems. But let's say that we will accept the override. It depends how many Knesset members can override the decision of the court, which means actually to annul, to abolish a court decision. This is not done in any other country that I know. So let's say that they can do that in a certain majority, not one vote, right. 61 out of 120. Depends if it's they can override every decision, or certain decisions that are to protect human rights couldn't be changed by the Knesset. Those are issues that have to be really discussed and to find a way. I believe, I'm not enthusiastic from having an override, but I think we can do it on certain conditions, as I said. And this is something that we can compromise.
Okay, but if there's no compromise and the government pushes ahead with this plan, what consequences do you see for Israel internally and externally perhaps as well?
I am so worried about it that I hope that this will not happen, because if the government takes over the power of to the government, the power of a court, the authority of the court, controls them, they can dismiss a judge, they can appoint a judge. This is the end of our democracy. I believe that it will be understood. This is what the public demands. As you saw, all the demonstrations, people are really concerned and worried. I hope on this we can come to a kind of compromise, what will be the committee that selects judges to all courts, all layers of courts, and of course to the Supreme Court. Now you hear always this fake news that this is the only country that judges are those who select their own colleagues, the judges. It's not true. Of course, as I said, we have a committee. Politicians are involved. They have to come to agreement with the judges before every judge, especially the Supreme Court, is appointed. So it's a story, it's a fake story.
Right.
Judges do not appoint the judges. It's a very careful selection system that worked successfully for years. Well, nothing happened.
Okay,
You can consider everything, you can reconsider again and again. But
because we're an international channel, I just want to go back to the question. If, though, these reforms as proposed by the government passes, what potential international ramifications do you see for Israel?
I really don't know, because we are worried what will be with the protection of rights. The Knesset and the government will have the power to infringe. I don't want to believe that on our domestic level it could happen that the reform, which they call a legal reform, which I think it's a regime reform, I don't think it will work this way. As you said, we will find a compromise. I'm sure we have to find a compromise. Let's say one of the issues is the basic law. Basic law should be a chapter of our constitution that wasn't written now, but we have basic laws. And the idea that the court will not review basic laws is dependent, of course, on the question, what is a basic law? Not everything that the Knesset will call a basic law is really a basic law. All this, right. We need a definition, we need special legislation. And on the international level, I'm afraid. People say about the economy is in danger. I don't know. This is not my field, but this is how people feel about it. And there are already signs that it may happen. And of course, international level, I must say, international law respected and accepted the judgments of the Israeli court until now. And this was a protection of our people, of our soldiers, of our generals, of everybody, because everybody knew that the Israeli court is an independent court. I don't want to think if they will not recognize it as an independent court and an independent legal system. I hope it will not happen.
All right. Former Supreme Court President, Chief Justice Dorit Beinisch, thank you for joining us on i24 News.
Thank you for having me.